something really important that to know about past life regression that most people don't really talk about. And that is that you have never had a past life. Now that might sound strange coming from somebody who has over 8 years experience doing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of past life regressions. But it's a real important distinction. See, the thing is, you are a life. You are a current life, not a past life, but the thing that has all the lives is your soul, your higher self. It's this non-physical aspect that comes into a body and has a life. And when that life is over, it leaves and it goes back into the non-physical. So this idea of I have a past life, how many past lives have I had, is really, in a way, the ego trying to own something that's beyond itself. And that's what the ego always tries to do, no big deal. But the thing is, when you do past life regression, and in my case, I do Dolores Cannon's quantum healing hypnosis technique method, QHHT. When you do past life regression, no matter what technique you use, QHHT does focus a lot on the higher self, or we call it the subconscious. When you go into a past life, the thing that you're really always contacting is the higher self. And the higher self is the part of you that is the part that has the different lives. And even when I say the higher self is a part of you, no, you're a part of it, okay? Because it's bigger. But we can't help our orientation as humans on Earth. It's normal. So we take ownership for things that we don't own, like a past life, like our soul. It's not our soul. In fact, in past life regression sessions, I often see that one soul can have multiple lives going on simultaneously. So your soul is huge. It's way bigger than your ego. And the whole kind of spiritual quest is to surrender the ego, let the soul come through in a pure or purer form. So you don't have any past lives. You are one of the multiple experiences of this thing that we call your soul or your higher self. So when you go into a past life regression session, what you're doing is you're connecting with your soul. And every time that you connect with your soul in this way, and you experience a different aspect of your soul, there's a certain amount of awakening that comes through. And there's ideally a certain amount of releasing of the smaller you, of the ego. Because remember, it's the ego, it's the false identity that holds all of our suffering. In order to have suffering, and I'm not talking pain, pain is going to happen, I'm talking about suffering. So pain, for example, and that will probably be another video, pain is when you stub your toe. It hurts. That's pain. Suffering is when you say, no, why did this happen again? I can't believe, it's when you take that pain and you identify it with yourself. You identify that pain with an ongoing story, and you resist the pain. So anyway, we all have an ego. It's very necessary. But when we go into past life regression, whether the method that you're using talks about higher self or soul, Doesn't even matter. The only way you can access these other lives is through your soul, your higher self, your non-physical aspect. It doesn't matter what you call it, because it doesn't really need labels. So if you imagine, for example, a computer has memory, but then you can also store memory in the cloud, and then you can access that memory by many different computers. So think of your soul as the cloud, and think of yourself as limited to one computer. That same cloud can be accessed by different computers at different times. It can also be accessed simultaneously by many computers. So the reason that past life regression can be so kind of spiritually liberating is that we go beyond the ego, we touch the soul. And when we touch the soul, even for a brief moment, there's a kind of awakening to our true nature. And there's a seeing beyond our limited ego. For me, the first time that I did a past life regression session, which was probably over 15 years ago, long before I started doing past life regression myself professionally, I went into a life of a young guy who was completely different than me, personality-wise. So he was the kind of guy that would say, "What should I do next, boss?" It was like he had no will of his own. Now, in this life, I've always really been annoyed by people that kind of have no will, that have no dreams. You know, kind of like, what would you do if you won the lottery? Well, I'd just go to work the next day, no big deal, maybe buy a bigger car, you know. Where would you travel? Oh, I don't like traveling, or, you know. No adventure, no will. I always was really annoyed by that. Well, here I go into this past life where I'm this guy with no will. I'm this guy just taking orders and kind of okay with that. No resistance to it. And so it was kind of weird because even though this personality was completely different than mine right now, there was some overlap. There wasn't really an overlap in the character of the person, in the personality of the way of being, but there was this feeling of me that I have and that he had. There was a certain essence that was identical, even though everything else was different. So that's one thing I think past life regression does for people, is when you see these other lifetimes where you might be another gender, you might be another species, you might be from another planet. I mean, it can get really weird. It can get really incredible. But yet there's some commonality between you and that other being. I mean, you could be a tree in a past life, literally, and yet, even though the life is different, the consciousness, everything is different between you and that tree, but there's some little area of overlap. And that overlap kind of gives you a sense of your soul, of the eternal you, of that thing that never changes, even though your soul expresses through all different kinds of forms, eternally. There's some little essence of that soul that never changes. And past life regression, the more you do it, the more different lifetimes you have, the more you kind of hone in on that eternal part of you. And I think that's really helpful. It puts things in perspective, because I believe we are here to awaken to our soul and to kind of surrender to our soul and let it do things that we can't do and come from a perspective that we don't have. And so all spiritual awakening really is about letting go of the small ego, that ego that holds all the pain and suffering, and surrendering it to the divine, to the higher self, to the soul, however you want to phrase it. And so keep an open mind. If you're doing past life regression, it might take it to another level, that it's not that you have past lives. You are a life, and there are other lives, but what you really are is that thing, that soul that has all of the lives. And that's what we want to become more and more. And drop all other false identities, use them, but don't get lost in them. Thanks for watching.